Alright guys, it's Chatterbox Reviews, coming at you guys with a review for House of the Dragon, Season 1, Episode 10, the finale episode. This one's titled The Black Queen, and once again I'm joined by my friend Greg for this one.
How's it going?
And yeah, so we were really excited for this finale episode. We didn't get a chance to share our thoughts on Episode 9, so that's where we'll start off here with this one. Just kind of a brief overview, maybe talk a little bit about the ending, as it kind of had a big role in the start, at least, of this episode. And then we'll get into this episode. We'll go through it. We'll give a spoiler warning, of course, before we get into any of the major details of it. Just kind of share our overall thoughts at the beginning. And then, maybe at the end, talk about maybe the season as a whole, since we won't have any, predictions for next week or anything like that. Or I guess like predictions for next season too. We can go over those as well. And hopefully we'll be doing a ranking video as well. If we get the chance, ranking all these 10 episodes. I think that'd be something fun to do. Not too long, but just something kind of sharing our thoughts and comparing our lists might be fun to do. So keep an eye out for that as well if we do that. So. All right, so let's start off with episode 9. So this one was the Green Council. So this was kind of almost kind of a two-part finale, to me at least, is the way I look at it, with episode 9 and 10 showing kind of two sides of the aftermath, if you will, of Viserys' death, and how kind of earth-shattering this is, and how it kind of moves in these different directions. And I was a big fan of this. That's what I really liked about episode 9, is that they committed to just showing the greens. We actually don't even get a frame of Rhaenyra in the episode, which to me, I really appreciated that. I really liked that they committed to it, and they didn't just show this like cheap kind of cliffhanger at the end with Rhaenyra and Dragonstone, hearing the news or anything. I really liked that they had these kind of self-contained episodes, and I felt like it was just a great way to kind of spend some time with these characters. And like Greg said as well, I think you said in the predictions for last episode 8, we see the crownings of both Rhaenyra and Aegon, and the parallels by splitting up these episodes too, I think worked really well in that way. And a lot of tension in episode 9, right? The big ceremony at the end, Rhaenys being kind of trapped and getting her out of there. And of course the ending of how that goes. So yeah, big fan of episode 9, for sure.
Yeah, I think what they did well in episode 9, especially, was just showing how hurried everything was, how rushed, even just by showing all these common folk in King's Landing rushing to get to the crowning. It really conveyed how much Otto and various other members of the small council and Alicent really wanted this done as quickly as possible, so to not tip off Rhaenyra. They can get him crowned in front of the populace of King's Landing, and that gives him legitimacy. So I thought they did that well. I had kind of thought early on, before the show started, I honestly thought they would do a finale in which the last couple scenes were each of Aegon and Rhaenyra being crowned, like intercut.
Yeah.
But at the same time, so I thought that's kind of what I thought was going to happen. But I think it makes sense to give each of the factions their own episode. Obviously, episode 9 being the Greens, episode 10 being the Blacks. So yeah, I think in summation, I think that episode 9, really delivered, pushing the Greens and what they're pursuing here, and really just their raw ambition.
Right.
And I think simultaneously also very much shows off the grandiosity of the crowning, right, at the Dragon Pit, which we just see the sheer volume of people and all the different, kind of knights, household guards, creating that tunnel for Aegon, the High Septon being there, his crowning, just everything I think was really demonstrated the scale well. And like I said, yeah, I just think they really handled, showing how hurried everything was and how rushed and how everything was so meticulously planned, perhaps years, but certainly like months ahead of this. They knew what they had this plan in motion. All they had to do was, or they had this plan ready. All they had to do was set it in motion. So I think they did a good job of that. And I think they're setting up, some pretty interesting characters and ideas for the next season.
Right. Well, yeah, and I keep going back to that scene that actually kind of at the time seemed like maybe like a obvious thing, but the scene when Otto tells Allison before he rides off, prepare Aegon to rule, right? And he says that line. At the time, it didn't feel like, it felt like, oh yeah, like obvious he would say that, but now as it has, come to pass, I really, keep going back to that scene and thinking, Otto was prepared for this the entire time. So I think you're exactly right. It's they've had this plan and they knew exactly what was, at least Otto did, what exactly what had to happen. So for sure. And then of course the ending, I think that's just of note, especially for the kind of the way this one begins with well, we won't get there yet, but Rhaenys obviously plays a part. But so the ending, yeah. So Rhaenys comes through the ground on her dragon. That was what an epic kind of sequence there at the end. But she does make the decision. She could have burned them all, and we get well, whatever. Daemon questions her of that in this episode, and she decides not to, burn them all, killing them all, and basically, I mean, not ending the war, but certainly taking out all of the important people on the side of the Greens so far that we've met. And I did see some articles and stuff, talking about this afterwards. This was not an issue I had, though. I think that made a lot of sense, as she explains in this episode. It wasn't her move to make, really, to do that. And but I did see some people kind of confused. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's true, and I think it comes down to the point of, I think there are certain rules people follow when it comes to war in Westeros, like generally speaking. And this would have been a pretty egregious violation, like torching all these people who have absolutely no defense at that time. None of them are on Dragonback. There's no sort of army garrison to fight against Meleys and Rhaenys. So yeah, I think that makes sense. Also, she doesn't seem like that type of person from everything. Like, Daemon, sure, maybe Aemond, but just torching your own family like that, I think takes a certain type of person, like a certain type of character who's just that reckless and, possibly like sadistic, immoral. And so I just don't think that really fit her character, so I think it made sense.
Right. And I think just the way, too, of how they've played out her character, and that, I mean, she thinks Rhaenyra, and I mean, I guess rightfully so, that Rhaenyra is responsible for her son's death.
Yeah.
Right? So she, like, I really like the way they played that and how she's kind of conflicted. I don't think she really supports King Aegon, but she's not going to, do something, like you said, that egregious for Rhaenyra either at this point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I like that kind of decision. Love that kind of ending sequence. Like I said, the tension, though, in that whole ceremony, you could just feel it. Like, everything was going right, everything, and things were just kind of too perfect. And then, of course, that happens at the end. So, great way to end off episode 9 there. And so with that, now let's get into our thoughts on episode 10. All right, so we'll start off with a synopsis for this episode. You want to take it away, Greg?
Yeah. Yeah, so obviously we said before it's called The Black Queen. So this is basically like you said, the second half of, essentially a two-part finale. This episode we're seeing strictly the Blacks and basically the aftermath of crowning of Aegon and, the attempted usurping of the throne by the Greens. So basically, yeah, Rhaenyra, various lords kind of around Dragonstone come to Dragonstone to kind of decide where to go from here. And Daemon has his ideas of very much haste, very much, declaring war immediately. And Rhaenyra kind of is more a little bit, well, quite a bit more cautious, and doesn't, and kind of is following in the footsteps of her father, not wanting to plunge the realm into some sort of massive war. And yeah, I mean that's basically the whole episode. The different opinions back and forth, the different strategizing, and without spoiling anything, that's probably all I can really say about it.
Right.
But yeah,
Yeah, and I think we said this before, but not actually that much happened to me. At least that's my thought when watching the episode. It was, to me, it was definitely more slower paced. Like you said, kind of the haste of all the actions for episode 9. Like once they find Aegon in episode 9, they track him down. The rest of that episode is pretty fast paced. I mean, things are just moving along really quickly. And this one is, to me, it feels a little slower. We're also kind of in the, even just the same room in Dragonstone there for, I would say, the majority of this episode even. So the slower pace, kind of small amount of settings, or small number of settings, definitely kind of makes this feel a little bit different. But yeah, really enjoyed this finale episode. I thought it was really great, and obviously a great sequence at the end of the episode as well, that we'll get to in the spoiler section for sure. And yeah, just a great way. I also liked it that there wasn't, a huge kind of cliffhanger, or anything like that. Of course, this event at the end shakes things up and definitely, propels us into a certain direction for next season. But yeah, it wasn't this like cliffhanger where we have to pick up next season. Like that they kind of just leave it kind of open, and then obviously we'll come back to this time next season. Really look forward to it. So yeah, what were your thoughts on this one?
yeah, no, I agree. I really enjoyed it. I think, um, yeah, I think it was a good way to set up this particular faction. I think just seeing the response of various characters to what occurred in episode 9, I think, was very revealing for each character. And obviously, there's a couple events in this that probably, um, you know, influence people's decisions even more, especially right at the end. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's very, like you said, a very contained episode on Dragonstone. We have the return of Corlys as well. I haven't seen him for a few episodes.
Right. Yeah.
Actually, I'm not sure. Have we seen? No, I guess we saw him in one episode prior to the big time jump. I believe one or two,
Yeah.
or I guess two. But yeah, so we get a return of him, and yeah, I just think everybody is kind of having to make their own moral decisions on what to do next, and the Greens have kind of forced their hand into something here after having crowned Aegon.
Right.
There's no kind of conjecture about what Alicent and Otto will do. Do they want their son on the throne? There's no time to react or plan. There's no time to plan. They kind of just need to react now and
Right.
and make decisions based on what actually has happened, not based on speculation or anything anymore. So yeah, I think it was handled really well. I think all the scenes in Dragonstone, really like that. The kind of the setting and everything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and they did a great job, I think. I really love when they lit the fire under the table. I thought
Yeah.
that was really cool, and that was something that we did
Yeah.
not see in Game of Thrones, at least that I remember.
No. Yeah.
And the short time that we were at Dragonstone with Daenerys. So
Hmm.
yeah, and that is really cool. Actually, now you mention that, like seeing more of Dragonstone, because it was so cool in Game of Thrones to me, at least.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is actually really awesome. Um, and yeah, okay, so we'll give a spoiler warning then now. We'll get into the episode, or some more of the details of the episode. All right, so of course we start this one off with them receiving the news, and Rhaenyra and Daemon. So Rhaenys is actually the one who arrives at Dragonstone, breaks the news to them about the crowning of Aegon, and kind of makes sense. Of course, that they hear it from her because she's on Dragonback a lot faster than a raven, or obviously a ship. And so she's able to actually tell them probably before they would know, because then we see, and we'll get to this in a second, but Otto arrives at Dragonstone. So if it wasn't for Rhaenys, that probably would have been the first time that they heard about this. Um,
Yeah.
right. So almost immediately then, a pregnant Rhaenyra, obviously she's still pregnant, is just in pain right when Rhaenys kind of delivers this message, and then shortly after has this miscarriage, stillbirth. I'm
Yeah.
not sure exactly which it is categorized under, because I'm not sure how far ahead she was. I think
Yeah.
the Maester says it's before term,
Yeah.
and that. So yeah, just a really graphic, I would say, scene here, showing all of this. And yeah, I thought this was a really great kind of sequence here, though. To me, I saw this as just her realizing that she did not have the time really to go through the rest of her pregnancy, as a result of this news. I mean, she knows this kind of fight instinct, kicks in here, if you will. So I don't. So I don't know. I loved your thoughts as well. But to me, I don't think she really like caused it to happen. But once it was happening, I think she was kind of just wanted to kind of get it over with and kind of move forward now to the plans and how they were gonna react to this. It almost seemed like, yeah, it's just like she didn't have time to finish this off and deliver the baby. So yeah, how did you see this sequence?
Yeah. Honestly, I think it probably was the way I interpreted it was probably like precipitated by this news, at least because we hear Rhaenys come in, or we see Rhaenys come in and tell her about this, and then immediately we see her begin to go into some sort of pain. I guess her water broke or something. So I mean, I think it was probably because of this
Okay.
mental anguish over hearing this news that kind of precipitated an early labor. And then once she got in it, I mean, it was just such a brutal, painful, kind of premature birth that, there was really nothing. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think she wanted to get through it, but I think more than anything, it was just an incredibly painful birth that was precipitated by something else horrible that happened. Like, I think all around, it was just a pretty horrible environment for her,
Right.
knowing about her half brother usurping the throne and going through this really painful pregnancy. So that's kind of how I read into that.
Yeah, and I think obviously she still mourns the loss of her child. We see that, in the next scene as she wraps up, the fetus as well. And so yeah, I'm not saying that she doesn't obviously care or anything like that, but
Yeah.
I think it's very much this kind of, this kind of news that kind of breaks down on her, in that moment. So, and then we see the small ceremony held, for the lost child, and this is when that, Kingsguard, the traitor brother, I'm just calling him because I'm not sure, they're both named King Eric and Eric or something, right?
Yeah. Eric with an E, with an A.
Right. And do we know which one this is, or do they?
I think it's
We got
Eric
it.
with an
We
A,
got a 50-50,
but
I guess. So.
yeah, I
um.
can't. Well, look, it's the one in episode 9 that
Right. Yeah.
knows Aegon better, I believe. I think, yeah, or I don't know. It's whichever one. It's the one that didn't try to get past Kristen Cole.
Right.
That would be the one that went to Rhaenyra.
Right. Right. So anyway, so yeah, so it is the same guy, of course, from that episode. And he arrives with, that's Viserys's crown. That's right, with
Yeah,
the Targaryen, emblem at the front of it. And then we see
yeah,
Daemon crown Rhaenyra. So this is, of course, right, as the parallel basically to Aegon getting crowned last episode, and one of many parallels, that I saw, in this episode compared to the last one, of course, with this kind of, two-parter, or kind of the two different perspectives. And we see everyone bend the knee, to Rhaenyra now in this scene, except for Rhaenys. she actually remains standing, which I thought was kind of interesting at this point. I guess it's because she hasn't, really honored the oath yet, as we see later in the episode. All right, so then, as I mentioned earlier, we get the scene with Otto arriving at Dragonstone. So he sails there, obviously. And like I said, this probably would have been the first time that they heard about the news, and maybe that's what Otto was expecting. But they obviously knew that Rhaenys escaped at that point. So he arrives to Dragonstone to deliver Aegon's terms to Rhaenyra. Though, of course, we know that this is basically Alicent's terms that she's, basically offering Rhaenyra through Aegon. Even in the last episode, we see that scene where she, implores Aegon to, be, I guess, merciful, right, to Rhaenyra, and basically, tells him the terms that he should offer her. And to be honest, they seem pretty generous on their end. I mean, now, Rhaenyra should be on the throne, yes, but in the kind of circumstance, everything considered, they do seem pretty generous. She gets to keep Dragonstone. Her sons will be given roles, beside the king, or, at least in the Red Keep. What is a cupbearer, though? But roles nonetheless. So, yeah, what seems to be pretty generous, and Daemon immediately lashes out at Otto, right? Threatens to kill him. Basically, or tells Eric to bring him to him, but then we see Rhaenyra, and this is the first time in this episode. Of course, it's a bigger theme throughout it, but this is the first time that we see Rhaenyra kind of push back against Daemon and kind of stop him, and she tells Otto that she'll consider the terms, right? Which is, Daemon wants nothing to do with the terms at all. Doesn't think they should be considered. And like I said, probably wants to kill Otto right there and then. So yeah, what an interesting kind of divide here that we see, start here and play throughout the episode.
Yeah, and also a bit of a parallel here to episode 2, I think, the Rogue Prince, where Otto arrives on Dragonstone to, basically demand the egg back from Daemon, and then Rhaenyra shows up on Cyrax, which she does here as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was interesting. Yeah, I think Otto. I'm sure they know that Rhaenys has already probably been here.
Yeah, okay.
But I think they definitely did want to deliver the terms in person and set out their agenda basically. But yeah, of course, Daemon immediately rejects it. I mean, he wouldn't take those terms away, but I think the fact that Otto Hightower is bringing it to him is probably adds some insult to injury. Yeah, I mean, I think under the circumstances, it probably would be fairly reasonable, giving them the seat of Dragonstone, or, Jace will inherit Dragonstone, Luke would inherit Driftmark still. Right. I think, obviously, these terms are what they are, but you have to understand, like, given the context, if there are other claimants to the throne, I mean, who knows how safe they really are. Right. I mean, for right now,
exactly, that
might sound okay, but there's obviously Rhaenyra, her sons, her other sons. Like, there's just a lot of volatility there, and so I think even if they were considering this seriously, it's got to be a tough sell for them. But yeah, another really nice scene on that kind of bridge on Dragonstone, a really good atmospheric place.
Right. Yeah, you're exactly right. I think they'd have to be kind of naive, right, to think that, these terms would be honored in the long term. Right. And that's the thing. And who's to say, they agree to the terms and then they're, killed, or they attempt to kill Rhaenyra, and Daemon later, which is basically what Otto has talked about is like the only way, forward. In last episode, he kind of implored Alicent to do that, or, to go that way. So definitely, and kind of like you said, a really, really interesting scene there, and yeah, definitely the parallels to episode 2. I thought that was really great, the way they did that. Again, another parallel. So then we see Corlys returns. So this was interesting. I did not expect this, to be honest. I thought Corlys was dead and gone. I didn't think we would see him again in the show, to be honest, going into this episode. I thought the way they kind of set it up is that he was, he had this fever and he was going to just kind of gradually die. Of course, he's still, has the cane, and he's not in perfect health, but he does return. As his fever subsides, and then he awakes at Dragonstone. This is kind of when we first see him, and Rhaenys is there, waiting, and of course she informs him of what has happened, and he has now decided, he says that he's, done with his pursuit of the Iron Throne, and kind of being a part of this game, or this Game of Thrones, if you will, but this game, right, and playing the politics and all this stuff. He says that he wants to remain neutral, basically. Wants Driftmark to, Ernest Valerian, to be neutral in this conflict that's ensued now. But it's, Rhaenys that tells him, Lucerys is now your heir, and, if King Aegon if Aegon is king, then Lucerys isn't safe, and then therefore House Valerian isn't safe. And this, of course, is what gets Corlys to act. And as we see in the scene later, and you've brought up many times, Corlys, how he is really driven by, protecting his house and, the kind of future of House Valerian. So I thought this was really kind of on brand, right, for that character.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I knew he was going to make it simply because I've read the books, or read the book rather. But yeah, I mean, obviously, if I hadn't, it definitely did not look great for him. Yeah, I know. I thought that was handled really well. He basically just wanted to go retire on Driftmark. Right. He's fought, a bunch of wars. He's taken several voyages, and he took, near fatal wounds. So I think that put things in perspective for him. That what he really cares about is his family and enjoying his last however many years. But then, of course, Rhaenys brings up that his heirs are also heirs to Rhaenyra, which means that if they do not crown Rhaenyra, if they do not, take her side basically and enter this upcoming war, then their family is very much at risk, and he, of course, cannot do nothing in this case. So we see him pledge himself to Rhaenyra in a scene or two later in the
right
in the main hall at Dragonstone. Excuse me. And because up until that point, I mean, Rhaenys has kind of been ambivalent about this war. She doesn't really, obviously, I don't think anyone thinks she's going to side with the Greens, but it's entirely possible they just stay neutral and stay out of it. But when Corlys comes in and makes his declaration, then obviously she fully backs him up. And yeah, a great scene. Great to have him back. Really enjoyed his character so far this season.
Yeah, no, yeah, exactly. I was really glad to have him back, right? I just wasn't sure if he would be. But yeah, and like you said, then he makes, he honors his oath to Rhaenyra. And then in addition, he shares this huge news basically about the Stepstones, that he shored up, their claim. So it's controlled now by House Valerian. The Triarchy has been kind of, stepped out again, basically, or stomped out again. And this essentially gives them the Narrow Sea, or control of the Narrow Sea, as they can block these shipping lanes to King's Landing, I guess, and, ultimately surround them at the end of the day, if they can block off these lanes and all this. And this certainly changes the tides of kind of this conflict here and where they're going, because up to this point they're kind of trying to figure out what their play is and all this stuff, and when Corlys brings them this news, this does seem to change things.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that was a major victory for them, and quite fortuitous as well, given the fact that they're about to potentially enter into a war with the Greens and the faction that controls the capital.
Right, and obviously, I mean, Corlys shoring up his alliance with them is big in that case. And I think in this scene I wanted to mention this. He does talk about the Lannisters, I believe, or maybe it's a scene before, but they do talk about the Lannisters. So they're very clearly setting up that it's the Lannisters and House Valerian who would or I guess the Lannisters would be the only ones to compete with them on the sea, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Potentially, like you would have the Greyjoys would have an impressive fleet, and even another house this is more from the books, but I don't know if they'll be included. But House Redwine in the Reach, they also have a big fleet. But yeah, I mean, obviously, in the context of this show, looks like the Lannisters sounds like they kind of have the second largest fleet, and Tyland Lannister is the Lord of Lord of Ships. Now I'm forgetting what it's called, but basically like the head of the navy or whatever for the royal fleet.
Right, right, and so I think that's just something to keep in mind, I guess, or to look forward to. Hopefully some battles on the sea, but we'll see. And I think also something to mention too in these kind of scenes in the war room, so to speak, or the main hall there, where they're kind of gaming things out. I think one of the lords does say, who cares about the men? You have dragons and that thing. So I think that's an interesting point too. But it really does speak to Rhaenyra's kind of hesitancy to just burn the whole. Like, yeah, they could go in and do it, and it probably would win, but how much? What's the cost, right, for doing that? And I think that's an interesting thing. And then, of course, as we get to in a minute here, the ending. Will that change her thought on that? And will they? Will she be willing to burn it all basically in order to win?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing there too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so after hearing this news, of the stepstones and this kind of advantage they have, Rhaenyra kind of moves forward, wants to kind of test the alliances or shore up these alliances of House Stark, Baratheon, and Arryn. As with their support, they could potentially win pretty easily, I think, or at least that's what they're kind of perceiving there. And therefore, and of course this is before the ending, so, at this point, therefore, they could kind of avoid the destruction of this big war if they can just get these alliances. They have this big advantage of the stepstones on the sea, and it gets to a point where there won't even be a war, right? Because they have such a huge advantage, they can basically just threaten the Greens, or fight small battles and win. And so this kind of makes it worth it for Rhaenyra then to go to war if they have such a big advantage that it's not going to be a lot of destruction. I think this is the thought process at this point. So then Jacaerys and Lucerys volunteer to go to these houses on Dragonback, deliver Rhaenyra's message to them. It's kind of a show of, basically just a show, right, of arriving on this dragon, coming down, kind of this threatening kind of feel, and she does let them go, which of course, she regrets probably at the end, and they swear to only act as messengers and not warriors, which is obvious foreshadowing for what happens later. So yeah, this is kind of an interesting part of the episode, and I really thought the way this would play out, as we would see, all of them go to these three houses, at the end of the episode, maybe they show up these alliances, where do we go to next? But we only get one. We only get Lucerys arriving at Storm's End. And this is kind of where the whole ending sequence happens. So he does speak Lord Boros Baratheon, but when he arrives, of course, we see Vhagar in the distance, and just amazing effects and cinematography, I thought, in this episode to end with the rain and the lightning, right? And the lightning almost kind of lights up Vhagar in the back, and he's so big, so big. So yeah, this was awesome, right? And you figure out pretty quickly, okay, Aemon beat him to the punch. Basically, Aemon is already
Yeah,
there by the time Lucerys gets there.
yeah, um, yeah. I mean, I think this is like really the first time we've seen Storm's End kind of this much. We have exterior shots, we got the interior shot of their kind of main hall, and yeah, it was great. I mean, Storm's End is called Storm's End for a reason. Obviously, they're right on the water, and it's very dreary weather all the time. Like
Mm,
this is so it's very atmospheric for Storm's End, and yeah, just the sound design. If you want to like get really specific, like was just really incredible. I thought, and really just set tone for what was to come.
right,
And
for sure.
you know, I
Yeah.
think even just the idea of this bad weather kind of impedes his ability to fly, Lucerys to fly Arax. I thought it was very cool. And then obviously, yeah, seeing Vagar in the background, we know what that means because obviously Aemond is now his rider, and I think that's a cool thing that they should continue to do. I think is to make various dragons synonymous with their rider.
Right.
You know, I think that would be. I think they've done a good job with the designs of dragons. Excuse me, to make them look, distinguishable.
Um,
You know, I think everybody kind of knows Caraxes by now with the really long neck. Vagar obviously just being this giant beast of a creature. And I think Cyrex even just in that kind of yellow tint, we'll probably see her more as well. But yeah, obviously the scene, you know, Lucerys comes, basically just says, "Hey, we're going to support my mother. You know, your father swore us an oath 20 some years ago." And Boris Baratheon says basically, what can you do for me? He's like, "Are you going to
exactly.
marry one of my daughters?"
Yeah.
She's like, "Well,
Yeah.
I can't. I'm betrothed to somebody else." He's like, "Okay, well then screw off." Like
Right.
you, he's basically he wants something. He's not going to simply swear fealty to Rhaenyra simply because his father did a couple decades ago. He wants something in exchange, a quid pro quo, so to speak.
Right.
And
And Aemon has
yeah,
already
and I think
offered that to him.
and yeah, we see Aemon chatting up probably one of his daughters or someone in the Great Hall. And yeah, clearly Aemon has already offered him some sort of deal, and yeah, he basically says, you know, you can go home and tell your mom that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so sends him away. Of course, this is not before then Aemond demands Lucerys to give him one of his eyes, and pay back his debt. Which I thought like this is just such a like asshole move by Aemon and such like a ballsy move too to just do it in the hall of Storm's End, like in front of everybody, and do this. Yeah, just such a huge move to make. And of course Lucerys refuses. Yeah, he's not doing that. And then it almost breaks out in a battle. Basically, they're gonna fight, and this, of course, is the foreshadowing of him being a messenger rather than a warrior. And I think he even says that line, "I'm here as a messenger." But Lord Boros stops them from fighting, not because I don't think he really cares. He just doesn't want bloodshed in his hall, and then to kind of reflect on House Baratheon if one of them dies, that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
yeah, and so we see Lucerys kind of rush to his dragon Arax to try to fly away as fast as possible, and yeah. This is what a great sequence that just starts here. He gets up in these storming skies and flies away. And this shot, I mean, this is one of my favorite shots of the season, I have to say. Like, this was just. So he's flying away. He thinks he, like, kind of got away, kind of looking over his shoulder, looking around to see. And all of a sudden, we just see Vagar fly right over him in the sky. And again, it's kind of this lightning kind of striking and just showing the body of Vagar over him. Again, great special effects in this entire sequence. I thought it just looked really sick, like really sick. And this is like better than a lot of movies. I think what this looked like in this ending sequence with the dragons here.
yeah. No, that was awesome to see just a silhouette of Vagar very, very cool. You just they really want to show how large she is and just show that off. And I think they've done a good job with, not only changing up the designs, like I said, but changing the sizes too. I mean, in Game of Thrones, obviously the three dragons are the same age, so they're going to be approximately the same size. But in this, I mean, we have dragons. Vhagar is over 100 years old. Arax is probably like 15 years, probably about the same age as Luke. Um, Craxus is, somewhere between those two. So I just think they've done a good job of differentiating that. But yeah, in the pure size of Vhagar, I think it's just absolute. Like Arax is about the size of Vhagar's head. You
Yeah.
can kind of match them up when you see them together, and yeah, just in a completely absurdly large dragon, and yeah, it's this great kind of chase sequence.
And sorry, just yeah, before we get to the chasing too, and I think you mentioned this to me, but the Drogon, is Drogon not younger than Arax in Game of Thrones, right? And I mean, and he's
Yeah,
huge in Game of
yeah,
Thrones.
I mean, yeah, that was very much, I think, not accurate to
Right, exactly.
book lore.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but yeah. Okay, yeah. So yeah, the this chase scene right ensues. Yeah, so tense. Just this awesome. We see Aemon, and again, I really like that they kind of show these characters on Dragonback, and they kind of do these close ups as well. I like that, and of course, both of them are kind of speaking to their dragons, trying to get them away, and so it does look like Lucerys does manage to get away there, kind of in this tight crevice where Vhagar can't get into, and then we get this kind of almost this autonomy for these dragons, right? And the way this plays out, we see Arax basically acting on his own and come up kind of beside Vhagar and just burns his face pretty much.
yeah,
Right, but this is not, Lucerys is not in control here, and he says, now I'm forgetting the line. Serve me, right? Serve
yeah,
me. And then kind of out of Aemon's control, the exact same thing happens kind of with Vhagar, and Vhagar, yeah, he catches up to Arax's course and basically just bites down on this dragon like a little crumb, and yeah, kills the dragon, Arax, and Lucerys in the process. Really great shot, I think, of Lucerys's cape kind of falling down to the water. I thought that was really great, and yeah, I think you already made the point I was gonna make, is that the difference in
yeah,
size was so well done here, and I really like this, showing how these beasts, right, these dragons that it seemed like the Targaryens or these dragon riders are in control, but not really. Maybe they aren't, because of these actions here by these two dragons at the end.
yeah, yeah. It definitely goes back to episode one where Viserys is talking about the illusion of the control of the dragons.
Right.
Definitely is kind of referencing that. Yeah, I mean, I think especially when you get two dragons fighting, then I think that is very much where kind of anything can happen. That the dragons are more acting off instinct
Right.
than they would maybe if it was just they're fighting an army, they're fighting a few people. But once it's a dragon on dragon, I think it's just you can kind of throw caution to the wind with them. Yeah, I thought that was really good. I think that just sets up things later, I think. And I think also just really reinforces the theme of this and a theme that will become very relevant in episodes and seasons to come, which is that, yeah, they are toiling with a very, very powerful force here.
Right.
And, especially here, like Aemond, he has the greatest weapon in the world that he's riding on, and he's really not taking it seriously.
Hmm.
He's because we see clearly isn't trying to kill Luke because he's distraught when it happens. He's trying to get Vhagar he's trying to get Vhagar to not engage. We see that. So why is he doing this? He's basically just messing with Luke, trying to scare him, and so clearly he's not taking the power that he has seriously, and obviously it results in a death that very likely is going to propel Rhaenyra to engage in war very quickly.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I really like this scene and the way that plays out. And like you said, Aemon does seem, pretty distraught, pretty kind of shaken that he actually kills Luke. Yeah. I think this is going to be an important thing for Aemon too, because I'm sure the Greens will not be, at least Allison will not be happy about this at all when she hears it with Aemon.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to change him a lot too, um, as a character going forward. And like you said, we see now this is like the only critique I had, or like the kind of issue I had with this episode, to be honest, is when Damon delivers the news to Rhaenyra here. But I'm just wondering, like, how would they actually hear about this? Like, does Aemon go and back to King's Landing and tell them, and then they relay the message? Like, because who would have saw
Yeah.
this happen? That was just my only kind of question here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair.
Because I mean, theoretically, Eamon could just, say, "Oh, I don't know," or try to kind of escape it or something. Because really nobody knew, and nobody would find Lucerys's body theoretically. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's not a huge deal, but that was my kind of first thought when I saw that. But what a great scene here. No dialogue. I don't think there's really any sound. It's kind of this very quiet. Maybe get a little kind of score. But yeah, so David delivers the news, and then we get this great kind of close up of Rhaenyra's face, and yeah, basically shows her kind of her broken, and definitely gonna be this thing that probably pushes her over the edge, to go to war, ultimately.
Yeah.
So yeah, really, really great end to this episode. And like I said, it's a bit of a cliffhanger, I guess, but not really. I mean, we can really kind of pick up in season 2, and really kind of flesh things out a little bit. We don't have to, come right back to this moment or anything that happened. Like they could have maybe just cut at like Aemon chasing down Lucerys or something like that. And I really like that they didn't do that.
Yeah.
They kind of left things open, right?
Mhm.
Going to the next
Yeah.
season.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it sets up the next season pretty well.
Yeah, and so that's just what I was gonna say. I know that you've read the book, so this might be a little bit difficult for you. But yeah, I guess in my terms of my predictions, of course, I mean we've talked about it. Obviously, we're probably not gonna see some battles next season. At least this. That's what I think. But I think, we talked about there'll be a lot of kind of alliances, shoring up alliances. Like we saw at the end of this one with the Baratheons kind of courting, playing the politics. I think we'll see a lot of that, at least in the earlier part of the season. And yeah, anything that you can share for the next season.
Yeah, well, we're definitely going to see Jace, Winterfell, and the Eyrie because that's where he's headed. I think that's going to be, and Damon going to the Riverlands as well. Yeah, I think we'll just see a lot of, at least I think for the first few episodes, a lot of uh, alliance building and reaching out to different houses um, and yeah, I think that'll kind of be the first few episodes. I'm sure there'll be a couple battles. I'm not exactly sure which ones. It kind of depends how they pace the season, but certainly I think there will be a battle or two, or at least some sort of fighting in season 2. We're gonna meet a lot. I think a number of new characters, just various various lords, knights that um, that join one, the Greens and the Blacks. And apparently, according to George Martin, we'll see Darren Targaryen, the youngest child of Alicent Viserys, who was not mentioned one time in season 1, not hinted at, not mentioned, not referenced in any sort of way. But I mean, he's a good character. He's really one of the kind of more likable Greens. I think he's a lot more like like Jace or a character like that. Kind of a Robb Stark archetype, if you
Okay.
want to look at it from that perspective. like a very gallant knight, very like uh, very respectable kind of royal prince, and you know, ostensibly he would be in Old Town probably in season one with his mother's side, his mother's family. But again, that's what he's doing in the book. But it's hard to say. But George, you said he's going to be in season two, so we have him to look forward to as well. There'll be a lot of really interesting characters. I think a lot of familiar house names. Well, I guess some Starks, some Tullys. Um, some Aarons, probably. Some various other houses. Tarley, perhaps. I know they're in the book. I don't know what they'll do in the show. But yeah, a lot of familiar house names, and I think a lot of cool characters, really.
Yeah, and of course, more dragons, I'm sure.
More dragons. We haven't seen Aegon's dragon. We haven't seen Helena's dragon. We haven't seen Jace's dragon.
Okay. Yeah.
And we just saw a shot of Vermithor at the end with Daemon.
Yes. Yeah.
Him going into the kind of going into the kind of mountains and Dragonstone, the crevices, and singing to Vermithor, who is the second largest dragon in the world at this time, who's currently riderless. So who knows?
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, because I mean Ryan Condal has said that about they're always going to be more dragons basically that they're introducing and showing.
Yeah,
So yeah, really looking forward to season two. I think you were saying that they've already told the viewers that it'll be a while probably 2024
yeah.
until
Looks like they're shooting. Yeah, looks like they're starting to shoot March or April of
okay.
23. But I saw an interview with Ryan Condal saying that they weren't ruling out a 2023 premiere for season two, but I find that a little hard to believe.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah. Hopefully, 2023. I'm fine if 2024. If that's the best product comes, then so be it. But yeah.
Yeah,
So looking forward to season two. Then thanks, Greg, for joining me for this one and all the episodes here for this season.
yeah, my pleasure.
And yeah, so stay tuned. Hopefully, we'll do that ranking video. Probably just a bit of a quicker one, ranking all 10 episodes, putting together our lists. Some fun to do there. So yeah, but otherwise, that'll just about do it for us for season one. So thank you guys so much for watching this one. And yeah, we'll see you then in future videos and hopefully for season two.
See you later.